Chris Watts has decided he is not to blame for what happened to Shan'ann and to Bella and to Celeste and his unborn son. Nope. The women in his life are to blame.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
July 20th was the first time Watts logged onto Snapchat, as far as we know. Snapchat started off as a sexting app. It's primarily used to share photos and videos which disappear shortly after they've been seen. Given Nichol Kessinger's numerous selfies, there's reason to believe she used the app, and that's why Watts was on it at 0200 on a Friday morning. That's 2 o'clock in the morning on a Friday morning. On the Crime Rocket blog, crimerocket2.com, I provided a couple of links if you want to read up a little bit more about Snapchat. There are articles like "Do you date on Snapchat?" and "Snapchat finally acknowledges the existence of sexting with memories," and also "The rise of Snapchat from a sexting app by Stanford frat bros to a $3 billion IPO." That's on Business Insider. If you're unfamiliar with Snapchat, you can kind of read up a little bit more about it there. By Friday afternoon, Watts was ready to start wining and dining his mistress and started Googling healthy eateries, breweries, gyms, and tickets for Bandimere Speedway. I'm not sure if Watts went to Bandimere once or twice, but we do know that he Googled tickets twice. The other thing that I want to mention here is what's really interesting is Watts was kind of gravitating towards eating clean, as he put it, eating healthy. And you can see in many of Shan'ann's Facebook photos the kind of food that she was eating and the kind of food that her children were eating. And you can clearly see that Shan'ann seemed to quite enjoy pizza. And, well, I'm not going to talk too much about the foods that she preferred, except to say that I think they were incompatible. I think that what Chris Watts wanted to eat and what Shan'ann wanted to eat were kind of incompatible. And if you think about that, have you ever sort of spent time with a smoker? If you don't smoke and they smoke, and then, you know, one of you wants to be in a non-smoking section, the other one, and what it ends up doing is separating you. You know, the one person's got to leave the room to smoke a cigarette. The one person might leave the room because they don't want to be exposed to the smoking. Personally, I don't really mind it very much in small amounts. I mean, I really don't mind being in a smoking section. I don't smoke myself, but I'm just saying that heavy smokers and so on, you can kind of have a situation where you're often separated from one another because of zones, right? And something like that can kind of apply to someone eating a certain way as well. Can you imagine if Shan'ann enthusiastically went along with the way Chris Watts was eating? It's not as though he wanted to eat in an unhealthy way, he wanted to eat in a healthy way. So can you imagine if she sort of went along with it enthusiastically, and Watts felt, wow, this is such a healthy meal. This is because it's quite hard to eat healthy. It takes quite a lot of effort. I think it could have brought them closer together. Also, meals that are healthy tend to require more effort. You need to cook them. You need to buy them. You need to go and buy the ingredients. They often take more time to prepare and more effort to prepare. So who knows, you know, if that area in their marriage had been aligned, they may have actually gotten along better. And I think in the previous episode, actually a photo that Shan'ann posted of food. Do you think Chris Watts would have eaten that food? On, I think, the 17th of July, Shan'ann posts a picture of lasagna that actually looks quite good. It looks quite healthy. It's kind of a spinach lasagna with red and white sauce. And there Shan'ann talks about catching up with her friend Sandra Geronda, and that was at the Vito's Ristorante and Pizzeria. During her meeting with Sandra said to Shan'ann, "I'm very proud of you." She said, "The lady that you are, and you're a driven spirit. Looking forward to spending more time before you head out to Colorado." On the 20th of July, 2 years ago today, Shan'ann posted a photo of Cece eating, looked like Cheese Whiz or something, and her brother is sort of tickling Cece. It's kind of another, quite a little intimate portrait of her daughter just relaxing at home in Aberdeen. And so you kind of have two different scenarios going on here. You've got Shan'ann at home with family, and Chris Watts not quite alone. He's about to have a big weekend with his mistress. He wants to make this weekend count. It's basically the second last weekend. And Shanann's also got a big weekend ahead of her, and their weekends are going to be completely different. Chris Watts is going to do one thing, and Shanann's going to do something else. And that kind of is also illustrative of how different these people are when they're allowed to do what they want to do, when they're left to their own devices in a way. I'm not a millennial, so I can't tell you too much about Snapchat, but I can tell you that the group, Toyota group Peekaboo, kind of has a relevance in the fact that Peekaboo was Snapchat's original name. The other interesting thing with Snapchat is its logo is like a ghost. And the whole idea is that you send an image and then it instantly disappears. Think about that in the Chris Watts case. This whole idea of something happens and then it disappears. Something happens and then there's no trace of it. So what's interesting to note on July 20th, which as I say was a Friday, is there appears to be no call between Shan'ann and Watts. In other words, from Shan'ann to her husband, or from him to her, either in the morning or in the afternoon. So it may be that they argued, or it may be that they sort of resolved, okay, we're going to spend our holiday at Myrtle Beach, great, bye-bye. And then they didn't really need to talk to each other the next day. Or it's also possible that Shan'ann felt she needed the day to arrange her business for Lavelle. Maybe she said, well, I'm not going to be around, so, something like that. We know that she was going to be quite busy the next day, Saturday, over the weekend. It's not as though Chris Watts didn't have any sort of contact with Shan'ann, because he kind of indirectly did. At 1709, Watts called Christina Meacham, that's Shanann's friend, and he asked her, do you want me to talk solely about the experience with Burn, or say I've been on Thrive for over 2 years, lost 65 pounds, and then go into the Burn experience? So, irrespective of whether Watts communicated with Shan'ann or not, here he was communicating with her friend, and he's been kind of set up to kind of promote Thrive for Christina Meacham, for Shanann's friend. And here he's now going to talk about how much weight he's lost, and that's a key aspect on which Thrive sells itself. Thrive kind of promotes itself in large part as a weight loss product. And I think Chris Watts, until he did what he did, he was quite a good spokesman or ambassador for the brand. Of course, he wasn't just using the product, he was also eating well and exercising a lot, and then incentivized by his mistress, incentivized to look good, lose weight. Christina Meacham said, can you talk about your experience with Byrne. Can you talk about the difference it made and what you have felt? The call starts at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Now, it would be interesting if we could see that video, if we could see what Watts said. Because bear in mind, he was ensconced in the affair at this point. Bear in mind, when he made this video, he was about to go off into the sunset with his mistress and have a sort of enjoyable weekend with her. Around about 12 minutes after the call to Christina, Watts searched Google for a CVS pharmacy in Westminster. I think he Googled DC Oaks Brew House and Eatery, the Vandermeer ticket office for the NHRA National scheduled for July 21st, and 24-hour fitness locations in Westminster and Thornton. I don't know what that was about. I don't know whether he was thinking about where he was going to move to relative to these fitness locations. Why do you think he wanted to know the locations of 24-hour fitness? As far as I know, that was where Kessinger worked out. It's also possible that he went or wanted to go and work out with her at the gym. Do you think that's possible? Now we're on page 9 of the phone data review, going on to page 10. It's discovery page 2089. At 1812, Watts transferred assorted images of Kessinger, some semi-nude, into his secret calculator application, and they included an image, a selfie of Watts with Kessinger. And there you kind of get a sense of how comfortable they were with one another. And, you know, if you didn't know any better, if you hadn't seen him with Shan'ann, you would have perhaps thought that they suited one another. Of course, when you see Watts with Shan'ann, you also get the sense that they suited one another. And the question is, did they? In this respect, Watts seems to be something of a chameleon. He can be a nice guy and the perfect guy to one person, and he can be a nice guy and a perfect guy to another. The fact that Watts transferred a tranche of images of Kessinger into his secret calculator app again on the 20th gives some reinforcement to the notion that at 2 o'clock that morning she may have been sharing private photos on Snapchat with him. When Watts refers to being addicted to Kessinger and her having a leash on him, it seems to be in the sexual arena above all. Now think about what that means when you say, I'm addicted to you. There's a sense of being helpless, of being vulnerable, of being just wanting more, of also not being able to think straight, also being compromised in a way that, you know, you're not fully in control of your actions. I'm not saying any of this to excuse Watts. I'm not saying any of this to minimize what happened to Shan'ann or the children. I'm saying it to kind of illustrate how, if you put yourself in Watts' shoes, what the experience was like for him as he gravitated towards increasing criminal psychology. And I think an aspect that is not discussed very often in the Watts case is the sexual aspect. I think what is not acknowledged, and I think it's quite clear why, it's because Shan'ann is sort of the hero or whatever, and Watts is the bad guy. I'm not saying he's not the bad guy, and Kessinger is also sort of demonized. So it's sort of Shan'ann is good and the children are good, Watts is bad and Kessinger is evil. Now, I'm not here to argue those points. I'm here to suggest a different way of looking at it. And before you get upset or angry or judgmental or make up your mind, just keep your mind open and allow me to make my point. And this is the point I want to make. I went to Joseph Campbell and just found out a little bit about what he talks about in terms of belief systems and what is the source of belief systems and so on. And although I found tremendous application in what he was saying, specific to the Laurie Vallow case, I ended up thinking about the Chris Watts case. He was talking about things like very symbolic things that are part of Christianity, part of Western culture. He's talking about the duality of especially Western civilization. He's talking about the duality of our beliefs. And when you talk about duality, we mean things that are opposites of one another, things where there are only two versions of one another. Now, we know that although these classic dualities exist, there are also things between them. So, for example, there's another reality beyond day and night, and that reality is the twilight, the sunset, the sunrise, and arguably the dawn and the dusk are some of the nicest times in the day. So, yeah, you are focusing just on day and night. Meanwhile, some of these really romantic and beautiful moments are on the peripheries of these classic ways of seeing what it is like on the earth. What I'm trying to say is there's a whole world beyond day and night if you're willing to look there. The point I'm trying to make is when you take this very dualistic view into the Watts case and you say, Chris Watts, bad, Nichol Kessinger, evil, Shan'ann, good. You miss quite a lot in terms of the middle ground in all of the people. In other words, the human person that is there between all the layers, between that duality. You miss all those pluralities. And you might say, I'm not actually interested. Chris Watts, as far as I'm concerned, is a monster and there's nothing good about him and I'm not interested. If that's what you say, that's fine, but then you should go and sit in the corner when I say the rest of what I'm going to say. When you imagine the sexual dimension to the Watts case, and as I say, it's an area people don't think about because they don't want to think about it. They want to think dualistically. When you don't think dualistically and you think about the sexual dimension with Chris Watts, this is what Joseph Campbell was talking about when he said something about what we are all here to do, what we're all about, what everyone is trying to get at on earth each day. Some of us without knowing it, some of us very much conscious of it. But what we're all about is we are trying to find an experience. We're trying to experience the rapture of life. Let me say that again. What all of us are trying to do, and by all of us, that means you and me, it means everyone in the Watts case, Nicole Atkinson, Nichol Kessinger, Chris Watts' parents, Shan'ann's parents, the siblings, the children, what everybody wants to do, also Dietary, what every living creature wants is to experience rapture, that they want the best possible experience of being alive. And obviously it is the business of being alive, in the business of being alive, that we are frustrated. Often as children we experience it, and then as adults we get more and more fleeting glimpses of it. It happens less and less often. And as we get older and older, it's less and less and less. But it doesn't need to be that way. When we look at the Watts case, there are two people that are definitely experiencing a kind of a giddy sense of rapture, and they are enjoying being alive, and that is Chris Watts and Nichol Kessinger. Now, people don't want to look at that on its own because they see what happens after that. They see the death of those innocent, beautiful, innocent children. They don't want to see that because there's the death of Shan'ann, who was pregnant, overshadowing all that. But if you imagine that we are going back in time and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Chris Watts hasn't maybe made up his mind what's going to happen in the future. Shan'ann doesn't know what's going to happen in her future. The little girls don't know either. The future's not set. Then Chris Watts goes off on his weekend, and part of that experience that just gives him the sense of rapture is sleeping with Kessinger, but it's also just being with her. That is why he feels addicted to her. Being with her is giving him this rapturous sense of being alive. And I'm sure a lot of us have felt that feeling. Some of us have felt it a long time ago. Some of us have experienced it recently. Some of us are experiencing it right now, and those are lucky people, because when you have that feeling, you want to have it again. And that feeling of addicted is, in this sense, as I say, addicted to the sexual pleasure, the rapture of sex. But there's also the addiction and the rapture of being with someone that makes you feel alive. And sometimes it's not just because someone else is beautiful or someone else is handsome, but because that person, when you're in their company, you feel good being who you are. You feel like this person sees who I am and they like who I am. And then you like who you are around that person. You like who you are. You want to be the best version you can be. You want to be fitter and stronger and more charming and whatever it is. You want to be a better you because it's such a nice feeling being a better version of yourself. And Chris Watts was starting to get addicted to that idea. And so if you say the premeditation wasn't set at this point, how many of these rapturous sexual encounters had to happen for Watts to say, I can't not have this. I can't go without this. I've got to make absolutely sure that this carries on. I can't bear the idea of not being with this person. I can't bear the idea of not having these experiences with this person. I can't bear the idea of going without. Do you see what I'm getting at? Now, if you have this dualistic view and you refuse to acknowledge Watts' humanity, given his inhumane deeds, but nevertheless, if you refuse to acknowledge that, you're not going to understand why this crime happened. You might think the fact that you can't understand and won't understand makes you a really good person. Again, you are subscribing to this dualistic view. If Watts is evil, that must mean you're good. If you can't understand Watts, it must mean because he's evil and you're good. You're too good to be able to understand what he did. You might think that that edifies you and makes you a great person, but it doesn't. It simply makes you ignorant, and it makes you lacking in imagination and not very intuitive and not thinking very far. It makes you ignorant. And I want to challenge you to try to push those boundaries, to try and understand other people that are nothing like you. Because people like that exist. People exist out there that are nothing like you, maybe people that you don't like, but they maybe aren't necessarily bad people. And there might also be people out there that are a lot like you, people that you like, but that are criminals or that are horrible people in some way. But no evil person is all evil and no good person is all good. No one is perfect. We all make mistakes. Not too many of us make the kind of mistakes Watts made, and I'm not sure if I would even use the word mistake to describe the annihilation of a family. Certainly not a mistake. It is, he knew what he was doing. It was a decision. But to go back to the timeline, the lack of data between 0200, 2 o'clock in the morning, and 5 o'clock, including zero contact with or from Shan'ann, as I say, may indicate an argument or that some critical data was removed on July 20th. That is the sort of missing area. We just don't know. We don't know whether they had an argument or whether there was critical data removed. Now, the fact that Chris Watts spoke to Christina Meacham suggests that despite the argument, if there was one, he was honoring kind of an appointment. I kind of get the feeling that it's once again Watts simply going with the flow so as not to agitate Shan'ann, so that Shan'ann's not going to call him and say, why did you not work with Christina? We've got a big Thrive extravaganza tomorrow. We need your support. We need your kind of promotion. What is going on with you? Watts is playing at being himself. Watts has got 5 weeks of his life to play at another side of himself. And what I think is really interesting is, I think Watts was very happy. I think he was very aware of another dimension to himself and to another woman. And after he got caught and after everything happened, Watts has now reverted to type. Now he writes love letters to his daughters. They read out apparently at his graveside by his mother, and that's supposed to make everything fine. I don't think it does. In fact, I don't understand how that needs to be in a book to say what is doing these good gestures to make up for what he did. Nothing's going to make up for what he did. Something like that really should be private, I think, because it's not going to change what is. It's not going to change what he did. And I don't think one should really forgive him for what he did based on him writing letters to his children now. It doesn't really make a difference. To me, what would make a difference is if Watts wrote about what really happened and explained what really happened, and in other words, gave us an insight into his criminal psychology without being gratuitous about it, saying, this is how it happened. This is how I descended into whatever, in an honest way, not by saying, you know what, I really love Shan'ann now, I miss her so much. Maybe if that's true, he could say it. But what about his feelings towards Kessinger? How did that change him? In other words, take us through the story from his point of view, how it actually happened. Is he capable of doing that? I don't think he is. I think he's capable of being a two-face. I think he's capable of trying to want you to see the best side of him. All right. I'm not going to take it further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.